Okay, good morning, everyone. Welcome to the Rural Communication Services Research Awards ceremony and paper presentation. In fact, we had a bit of a ceremony yesterday for all the awardees of IAMCR, so we will focus today on the presentations of the 3 awardees. We'll hope to have a discussion. We have a respondent. We're lucky to have Pamela Custodio here and have a discussion. Yeah, hopefully this will be a very fruitful contribution to the area of rural communication services. FAO has been trying to forward this concept of rural communication services for quite a while. Has really been looking for stories of evidence, and that's why they funded this award through IAMCR. They really want to have kind of academic evidence for what is happening in the field. So we had an award last year with 3 awardees. They were all from Southeast Asia, so we've been really trying to expand that to get more papers from other areas. So because they will all be published together in one publication that will come out by the end of the year. Very happy here to welcome our 3 awardees, and again congratulations on winning this award, which also I should have allowed you to get here. So we will change the sequence slightly. So we will start with Dr. Paulo Mefalopoulos, who has, until recently, was the representative of UNICEF in Chile. His paper will be more theoretical, so we thought we'd start with that. Then we have 2 case-based pieces of research. So Mr. Ibn Budiman, who is doing work between Wageningen University in the Netherlands and the Bober Agriculture University in Indonesia. And we have here Tim Fry, who is at the University of Reading, having done research in South Africa. So it would give us a really nice overview of different ways of approaching the field and different examples of what's happening and how we research it. So I'd like to invite Paulo to start. Thank you.
Thank you. My name help to see how it
yes.
Or is, I don't know if it is very easy. Just press enter or this.
You can use that one, and you can use that.
Okay, great. Okay, well, good morning. Thank you for being here, considering the early hour and the late dinner last night. Before start, maybe I should say just a couple of things to make you understand why and how this came about. I've been working in communication for development for over 30 years, and my ambition, my dream when I joined the UN from a private sector where I used to work, it was always to bring some sort of betterment in people's life, and hopefully to do it through a participatory empowerment approach. But I was never too sure how to go about it. I went from the academic world to the practitioner world in a couple of occasions. And then when I was in the practitioner world and I went to do my PhD, my colleagues there told me, you're good, but you're not theoretical enough to be an academician. Then I went back to the practitioner world and they told me, you're good, but you're too theoretical to be a practitioner. So I basically felt an outcast in both fields. And I actually was always challenged to find ways to bring some change. And this is what how it came about to actually try to combine these 2 approaches. Rural communication services, I think you all know what they are, and it's conceived by FAO as a way to empower rural stakeholders and improve their lives by applying communication methods, techniques, and approaches which have rural stakeholders' engagement participation at the center. And the idea for this paper came about when I was reading, I don't know if it's a manual or anyway, a publication document from FAO from an evaluation about rural communication services that stated that there was enough evidence to show that they were bringing some change, but that it would benefit if they had a more rigorous conceptual theoretical approach. And that's when I start thinking about applying my the other work I've been doing, which is called multidimensional model for change, which is something that originated from mostly frustration and disappointments and failures in my 30 years of work, especially in India, where I was working for 5 years as the chief of the Communication for Development program. And what I realized there is that one of the limitations of we were adopting a more sort of communication for behavior change approach is that it was focusing too much, too fast, too directly on the individual behaviors, neglecting a bit other components of what was around the change. So the multidimensional model for change, it is basically derived from a combination of two major methodologies. The first is SEM, social ecological model, which is, I think you all know, it's in a way an approach that comes down in a linear way and encircling different dimensions, one within the other. And the PRCA, which is a participatory rural communication appraisal, developed about the end of the 90s by a fantastic team in FAO, and I was one of them, but self-promotion. And then it's still being applied, used, refined. I was really lucky because I think I work in this, what was a Communication for Development Center of SADC in Southern Africa, and then the opportunity to work there. And so I kind of combine these two approaches. And the SEM, as I said, yes, it's linear progression. How does it differ from what it is a multidimensional model? Is that, and my approach is theoretical, yes, but inductive, not deductive. The same as PRCA. I mean, it doesn't come first from a grand theory. It comes from what's happening in the field and trying to see how it fits in theory. So this multidimensional model for change identified three context dimensions, let's call it environment dimension, which actually are conducive for eventual go to the fourth dimension, which is individual one, where behavior change should happen. The first dimension is public policy, okay? And any kind of change almost need to be supported by policy. The idea first came when I was working in India. Again, we were trying to eliminate open defecation. Sorry, it's not a very sexy topic in the morning, but and they asked us to do a campaign, a communication campaign to ask people, to persuade people not to do it in the street. Fantastic, great. The problem is that, for instance, there were not enough bathrooms. So how can you convince people to use a bathroom when there are no bathrooms? The policy was not conducive because there was no law saying that, for instance, eateries, restaurants had to have a bathroom. So that kind of thing was missing. The second dimension is institutional organizational. It is where different institutions are present or not, and they have the mandate and the capacity to promote the change you want to achieve. In Chile, recently we had a campaign to reduce school dropout, and we identify in the research that some of the issues of the dropout was curriculum not adequate enough, very old-fashioned, teachers having a very top-down approach. The poorest students didn't have the financial means from the family, so it means policy and institutions should support that. And of course, the institutional organizational also contains the search for alliances with civil society, with private sectors, academia, and faith-based organizations. And in UNICEF, we were very strong in that part, trying to build organizations to support the change we need. Finally, sociocultural, which in many ways is more complicated, but you probably know that the literature and the evidence shown recently that probably one of the strongest drivers for change is peer pressure. and therefore what kind of norms and of cultural environment you have to promote that change. If you have in line these three dimensions, then the fourth is the individual one, is where behavior change is expected to occur, and then where you can focus more knowledge, attitudes, campaigns, multimedia, and all of that. Okay, this is in a visual form what the model is saying. Now, in rural communication services, it applies the same, because even, and I have an example in my paper from a project which I think was sponsored by FAO, where they wanted to establish in Africa internet services. But to establish internet services, first of all, you need to make sure that the policy about internet are there and are conducive. You can have free access, you can have the infrastructure, so the money, the budget, the national budget should put money to put whatever you need, a tower or some connection. You need to have some support. If you do it, as in the case it was to facilitate market access by rural community, which were not very familiar with these sort of things, then you need, in the institutional organizations, to have somebody to help community and to train them, to support them, maybe the Ministry of Rural Development, maybe, I don't know, somebody else. And you can see if you have civil society organization working in those areas and support it, if private sector can help somehow, and whatever it takes. And then the cultural norms, seeing how is digital connection considered, if we need also to work with family, maybe the youngest one can go. So it's sort of trying to identify this. And then in the individual one, you actually get the promotion of this innovation, like having internet for rural farmers so they can access market. And again, you need to check what networks they have, networks of farmers, and what kind of facilities or knowledge gaps they might have to work in this respect. It's it's amazing how sometimes communication for development can be basically just about common sense. And the Robert Chambers used to say, common sense is the scarcest resource we have at our disposal. And I always bring up a silly example which happened to me personally, and I never forget, because when I was in Namibia, in Zimbabwe, we went with FAO on a project in Namibia and in Rundu, and they called us, the ministry said, we have an innovation adopted by a center I don't know where, and the farmers don't want to adopt it. So I went there, and among those, there was one where they were supposed to plant the seeds. Namibia was a very drought-prone area, and the farmers were supposed to plant seeds every 20 centimeters, and they wouldn't. They would just broadcast. So we went there with my colleague, and the first thing we did when we talked to them, we said, sorry, you've been told you have this, and you don't do it. Why? Why do you keep broadcasting? Because farmers may not have theoretical knowledge, but they have practical knowledge, and they're not stupid. And they told us, well, in this area we have a lot of rats. Rats are very smart. When we plant in seeds in row, they find the pattern and they eat 80% of our seeds. When we broadcast, we save more than half. So amazingly enough, all these big scientists, extensionists, never bother to ask these people, why do you do it? And sometimes this is what makes all the difference. So to conclude, and then well within the time, this model intends to bring this change by making sure that the approach maps these different dimensions, doesn't go straight into, let's see what innovation we want to promote, let's see what behavior change we need to promote. But it rather say, let's investigate and explore the elements in this dimension, and let's do it in a participatory way. Let's do it with the farmers, with the rural stakeholders, involve the family, whatever, and bring the interest of these people in the decision-making process, first of all. Then let's make sure that this dimension, what I call environment dimensions, are actually have a basic respondent in what is needed. And only at that point, let's go deeper and let's try to promote the adoption of innovation at an individual level. So with this, I finish. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Paolo. What we'll do is we'll give a few minutes for explanatory questions. We'll have a discussion later, but if there's anything in particular you'd like to have a quick answer about, we still have time for that. Anyone? Yes, do it, go Tim.
Not too difficult one, please.
Firstly, love the rats and the broadcasting is like an argument against adoption and diffusion kind of stuff. The question's on, so my background's in MEL, and it seems like this model actually could be used as another way of looking at MEL, right, for systems change. Is it used at all within MEL frameworks? Can it be adapted into MEL frameworks? It looks like the individual is that kind of outcome-based change, and the other elements of it are that more output-oriented kind of stuff.
I don't think it can be defined strictly in outputs and outcome at different level. But again, it can, because I've seen how many times we failed, not because we did a poor job in trying to build the campaign for change. It's that because the elements around were not there. So it's not a revolutionary model. It's more an organizational one, organizing knowledge for planning. And make sure you not to forget, when I present this, and recently I was in Ethiopia at the SBC conference, and I challenge the people, the participants, I say, look, if you find me an example of a change, of an initiative with a change, where this model does not apply, or there is something not in this model, I'm going to pay you a dinner in the best restaurant of Addis Ababa. I had to pay never, I didn't pay any dinner or stuff. And it's, as I said, sometimes it's difficult to find the link between theory and practice. And what I've been trying, and I'm sure can be improved further, is find this link and making sure that when we plan, because most of the failure, not only in rural environment, rural communication, but of the communication overall for change, to me resides exactly in the lack of understanding the cross-sectorial approach. We are brought up in academia to go vertically, sector. We are brought up, I work in UNICEF, FAO, and every time if I sit on a table and there is a health specialist, it will only take up health or education. But when you need change, it's very seldom that the cause is linear and there is only one reason. And so this is an effort in that part.
Thanks very much. And again, Paolo. Thank you. And what I really like about the work is that it's not about, claiming this turf about, this is the blueprint or the model, which I think a lot of theorists or academics actually have done with approaches that need to be adapted to any situation. And just have the basic principles of how do we understand what is needed and what the people want. So thanks very much for your contribution. So we go now to the next paper, which is Mr. Ibnu Budiman, and his presentation is Group Model Building as Rural Communication Process, Case of Innovation Systems in Dairy Farming. Are you doing that?
Good morning, everyone. So my name is Ibnu. So our study is about this is one of the communication methods, I would say, related to what you mentioned before.
Sorry, could you speak up a bit? Yeah.
Check. Yeah. It's called a group model building workshops. We use this to improve the innovation system in agriculture. So So as a background, so this is a part of the project called Smart Indonesia Agriculture. This is a collaboration between the Bahaning University and Bogor Agriculture University in Indonesia. So the project aims to promote the smart farming in the dairy farms and in aquaculture in Indonesia. This is an interdisciplinary project. There are 9 PhD working in the project, and myself is one of the PhD. And the topic is about I try to understand the relationships between the social systems and the technology adoption in the dairy farms. And I have 5 papers in my PhD, and 2 papers are using the group model building workshops. So on this study that I'm presenting today, I reflect to that experience on using the group model building workshops and how it supports the rural communication. So the research question is, how do the group model building workshops work as a rural communication method in terms of supporting the improving the innovation system in the agriculture, especially in the dairy farms. So the case study is in 2 districts in West Java province in Indonesia. And so what is the group model building? It's participatory approach. We try to create system dynamic models. There are 2 of them, capsule loop diagrams and stock and flow diagram. I will explain this later. And so we work with the stakeholders, had a discussions, exchanged perceptions. We try to analyze the problems from the systems perspective. So as I mentioned before, I did on 2 other papers. The topic was about the adoption of technologies related to mastitis management in the dairy farms. Mastitis is a disease on the coast that influencing the milk production. And on the other topic is about the impact of the digitalization in the dairy production system. So what we did on each topic, we did 5 group model building workshops with farmers, and then with the rural stakeholders, with the dairy companies, dairy cooperatives, local government, and technology providers. For the farmers, we divided between the workshop for the high educated farmers and the low educated farmers in order to ease the communication process, especially with the low educated farmers. We need to use more visuals to show them the technology in terms of discussing the technology itself. So we started with having the group model building workshop with the farmers. In each workshop, we create the causal loop diagram. What is the causal loop diagram? So it's basically the diagram that shows the interrelations between different factors. So in our case, as I mentioned before, the topic was about what factors influencing the farmer's decision in adopting technology. So in the diagram, it shows the different factors that interrelated. So in the causal loop diagram, there are several components, like there is a variable, the factors itself, and then the causality, the arrow between the different factors, and then the polarity. Polarity is whether the causality is positive or negative between the different variables. So we started with the workshop with the farmers. In each workshop, we create the causal loop diagram. How we did it was, so we had a discussion with the farmers. We asked them how and why they discussed it, they adopt the technology, and then what is the impact of the technology. So for example, I facilitated the discussion, and my co-authors was drawing this causal loop diagram on the screen. So every time they answer the questions, we visualize that in this causal loop diagram. So that's how we did it in the group model building workshops. And at the end of the workshop, we verify with them whether the models that we built are representing what their answer was. So from each workshop, like for the high educated farmers and the low educated farmers, we combine the causal loop diagram from each workshop, and then the results of it, we brought it to the workshop with the rural stakeholders. So in the last workshop with the rural stakeholders, we finalized the causal loop diagram, the model. And then in this study, I reflect on that experience, and then I combine it with the systematic review about what has been said about how the group model building workshops are supporting the rural communication process. So the results are, there are these 4 points on how the group model building workshops contribute to the rural communication process. First, in terms of topic, this is one of the topic on the other papers I mentioned before. So from the workshop, we is the researcher and also the participant of the workshops identify what are the central factors that influencing the farmer's decision in adopting the technology. Central factors mean that the factors that are in the center, you could say that have many causality with the other factors. For example, in this diagram, income is one of the central factors. There is a centrality analysis with the causal loop diagram. So yeah, from the workshop, we identified what are the central factors that influencing the farmer's decision in adopting technology. And then from the workshop, we also identified by creating this diagram in the workshop, like the factors that are maybe not mentioned a lot in the previous studies, for example, like culture or language that is used in the dissemination programs of the technology. And then next point, also on the other topic from the group model building workshops, we identify the negative impacts of the technology. In this case, is the negative impact of the digitalization. One of the negative impact that we identified was the income gap between the high resource farmers and the medium resource farmers and the low resource farmers. So we found that the digitalization has more impact to the income to the high resource farmers, while for the low resource farmers it's actually very little income. So this is increasing the gap of income between the farmers. There is a digital divide between these different types of farmers. So on this case, we also upgrade the causal loop diagram into the stock and flow diagram. This is another system dynamic models, where we can project the future impacts of the digitalization. And we found that in the 50 years projection, the gap is actually increasing between the high resource farmers and the low resource farmers. High resource farmers meaning like farmers that have the technology, the mobile apps, understand the data and so on. But the low resource farmers, like the farmers that don't have the mobile phone, don't have the apps, and do not have the ability to read data from digitalization. So yeah, from those exercise with the group model building workshops, it has impacts. I think this is related to what Paulo mentioned also before about some dimensions of the change. There's an impact to the farmers and the rural stakeholders at individual level, and then at the group and the organizational level. For example, for farmers at the individual levels, because of the workshops that we had, there is a change in the mental models of the farmers, how they understand the technology, what is the correct use of the technology, what is the benefits of the technology, and this gave them confidence in using the technology. And then for the rural stakeholders, from the workshops, it gives them the chance to discuss about the alternative strategies, how to improve the strategies for promoting the technologies to farmers. So they started to thinking about new arrangement between the dairy companies, the dairy cooperatives, and the technology providers on how to improve access of the technology to farmers. So in those exercises, in those workshops, there is a social learning happen among farmers, between farmers, and also with the rural stakeholders. We started with having discussion in the workshops, and then it triggers the participants of the workshop to think and analyze the problem from the systems perspective. So they create the causal loop diagram so they can see like how the problems related to one another, and also thinking about the possible solution. Like for example, if they change factor A, this will relate to the factor B and so on. So yeah, this is also challenging our assumption as a researcher about the technology itself, whether the technology is the real solution. So there is a shift also from a conventional approach about teaching farmers about new technology, but with the working with farmers, like to also learn from them about what are the challenges and so on. And yeah, some discussion points is so the group model building workshops is not only about knowledge sharing and exchange perceptions between farmers and other stakeholders or rural stakeholders, but it's also about strengthening the network between them. It's also increasing the solidarity between the farmers and also the rural stakeholders in thinking about technology. And this could happen also, it depends on the quality or the degree of participation of the participants in the workshops. What we did actually in those two different papers that I mentioned before, we did two different approaches, like on the paper 2, let's call paper 2. We started with having a survey to the farmers, so we get to know the farmers through the survey and interviews before, and then we had the focus group discussion. And then on the other paper, we did it the other way around. We started with the focus group discussion or the group model building workshops, and then after that we had the survey. And yeah, so there is a different degree of participation resulted from that approach. From the first approach, when we started with the survey and had an interview with farmers, so they start to get to know us and have more trust to us, so they can speak more freely and open during the focus group discussion. So yeah, there's also the role of the facilitation to make sure that the group model building workshop itself that can really create the useful information. So the conclusion is the group model building workshops play a significant role in rural communication service in terms of improving the innovation systems in the dairy farms in our study by facilitating dialogue. We had a discussion and dialogue about the factors that influencing the technology adoption by farmers, and also understanding about the impact of the digitalization. And then it's also strengthened the network among the farmers. For example, in one of the case study, one of the cooperatives has 2,000 members of farmers in one district in Java. And yeah, some of them didn't know each other before the workshop. And yeah, there was also collaboration that was started to be triggered from the workshops. So this is also kind of exercise for them to have like the collective decision making between the stakeholders that are responsible for the technology transfer in the area. And last but not least, it also promotes, of course, the ownership to the solution, because they thought about the solutions during the workshop. So this promote ownership to the solutions for them. And also there is the empowerment aspect that are also created from the workshop that make them, invite them to see the problem and see the solution from the system's perspective. And yeah, that's all. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Just terminology. You use the word technology transfer, right? And so what has been criticized for a long time for linear process, right? And how do you differentiate between like what you mentioned as a more non-linear process, right? And then saying that it's support technology transfer. So it is a little bit confusing for me, but definitely there is an explanation in it here, right?
Yeah, I should have changed that term.
No, you don't have to, but maybe, I just, it triggered my mind.
That's true, that's
Yeah.
true, yeah. It's just, I was thinking that because this is the IAMCR, I expect that the communication background audience maybe is easier to understand to use the term technology transfer. But yes, of course, from the development perspective, this is many debates about that. Yeah. Thanks.
Yeah, because it's very interesting that you do it by technology, by the technologies, you know, that's the goal, adoption, but then you use all those methods like the visualization of the analysis, and that is actually building on people's critical skills, which is what the flip side is of this, what Ataru is talking about. So yeah, it would be really useful, I think, to get that terminology straight. Yeah.
Just a small clarification question. If you can illustrate a bit more in detail what you mean by mental model that you refer to in your presentation.
The causal loop diagram.
Okay.
Yeah. That's considered as a mental model.
Okay.
Which can visualize
Yes.
the ideas of people.
Yeah, because that's based on
perceptions.
their answers,
Yeah.
participants. Yeah.
Thanks.
Any other? Yeah.
Two questions. The first is on the methods, the causal loop diagram. Do you think, I've seen it but not really actually used it or looked at it in depth. The positive and negative elements of it, do you think that's unhelpful or do you think it is helpful? So from when I looked at it, like having that binary element probably isn't that helpful because in my head you can't ever have something that's entirely positive or negative. There's also, do you think it puts decision making into a static perspective where it puts it in this one space rather than thinking actually how does decision making change over time? How do different people reflect on decisions and change them over time? I don't know what's your feeling about that method.
Yeah. So first, actually, the polarity, positive or negative, it's more for like if I do like the centrality analysis, is more quantitative analysis for the causal loop diagram. So that helps the centrality analysis. So it's more for the purpose of that, but of course also in the context of these system dynamics concepts, like it has to be updated every time. Like it will change. Like maybe in a few years the situation change, the context change in the area that could change, and also like in different location that could be different also. So yeah, it's quite local context.
I've got a broad one about technology.
Maybe that's better about in the discussion then. Okay, thanks again, Ibnu. Thank you very much. So let's move on to our third presenter, Tim Fry from the University of Reading in the United Kingdom. And the title of his presentation is Strengthening Innovation Structures as a Pathway to Weave People Together Around Shared Priorities. Perspectives from an Agriculture Innovation System Diagnostics in Mpumalanga, South Africa. It's already open, huh? Okay.
Sorry.
Doesn't matter. Just,
Nice. You have to bear with me.
With lots of these, because there's lots of animations going through it, and I like animation as a way to structure things.
Can you try to speak a little bit in the microphone? Because you swallow words.
So, a bit of a background of the study, what it's trying to do, and in this like an ongoing process of systems transformation that we're doing in Mpumalanga, this province bordering Mozambique in South Africa. We're trying to help support decision making by different food system actors. So a lot of this takes systems innovation methods and theories. A bit about the methods of this as well. So the actors we engage with this are as many people as we can. So it's not just your traditional farmers, your value chain actors, your input market people. It's also if you use water, if you are based in a more rural area than an urban area, if you're based in a city and you want to access food to as many people as possible. So we want to support decision making by all these food system actors in Mpumalanga. And the way we try and do it is using participatory research that really all it is trying to do is in group discussions and individual meetings rather than interviews, I want to call them, and in workshops is facilitating reflection on, okay, how do we all work within the system? What are the outcomes that affect us all? What are the common challenges we have? Where can we share solutions? For this study, that kind of entry window into the system is agricultural education and training, and really looking at AET, I'm going to start calling it AET from now on, as this rural communication service in itself, bringing together different people around different outcomes and how we communicate those different outcomes, the different needs, the different skills through curricula and pedagogies. So a bit about the theories. I think I come from a different background than Paolo. So I'm looking at more systems of innovation, and it comes off the same kind of non-linear dynamics, the co-evolutionary systems. For my work, I kind of moonlight as a philosopher, a very bad one. So I look at more than, or rather than socio-ecological or socio-technical, a lot of the work I look at is social material. So I look at the kind of ontological entanglement of where there's agency. So whether is it just social constructivism, is it more technological determinism, or actually do they both have an influence on each other that's constantly updating? Why it's important for this study is the non-linear dynamics in an innovation system influenced by loads of things we can and can't see. So there's different histories, there's different feelings, different values. There's the more tangible things, there's finance, there's policies, there's politics. And what we want to look at is the ways that different things interact to create outcomes for the entire system, people and other things in the system. Why do we use this kind of framework for the study? It's just a tool for us to help elucidate how changes in relations between humans and non-humans, and non-humans and non-humans affect outcomes. And this, again, is just a way to stimulate reflection by participants and also at the end of the process by everyone. The first thing actually we're looking at this is, again, look at the dynamic system. So actually, where does the system come from? What are the big influences on it? And for us, a lot of this is down to the neoliberal and neocolonial path dependencies in the world, I guess. So this also helps us look at power dynamics within the system. Who's influenced these power dynamics? Who have benefited from them? Who have lost out from them? Why this is important for rural communication services? I think, again, it looks at not just the physical things, but the non-material elements, the structure, how systems create different outcomes for different people. Specifically for Mpumalanga in South Africa and agriculture more generally across the world, I think this would be fairly obvious to everyone, but I'm going to repeat it anyway. Neoliberalism means there's political disengagement from the state, especially in agriculture. We get, in South Africa, for example, there's still public extension, but it's very weak, and a lot of the extension services and rural communication services that are provided are actually done by private companies, by supermarkets, by kind of these private entities. Generally, neoliberalism has meant that we've got more privatised resources, there's less communal land, there's much more emphasis on controlling, for example, genetic resources, that sort of thing. What this also meant is that food systems have changed from more localised food systems in Mpumalanga to actually vertical integration. So supermarkets controlling a lot of the value chains and input suppliers, and this creates a system in Mpumalanga, and again generally where we've got two systems at play: this smallholder, small-scale farmer system, and this industrial agribusiness system. What this often means is that smallholder farmers and emerging farmers are unable to actually participate in different input markets and value chains because they're more engineered towards these big agribusinesses. The more interesting thing, I think, is actually when we look at, for example, the new green revolution in Africa is a good way of looking at it. This whole neoliberal system that's developed, I think, means that the general feeling that I see from a donor perspective is that we will think industrial agriculture is the best way forward. That's the best developmental pathway for small-scale farmers. But when we look at the system that has developed in reality, there's no system that kind of brings them into this industrial agriculture. There's more questions about whether industrial agriculture is good for the world anyway. There's the bottom box you can see about technology, deterministic and monofunctional economic development is also super important because we look at, I think the World Bank does a lot of this, right? Okay, let's have technologies that will make agriculture better, whatever better means. There's also, let's have agriculture being just this economic driver rather than looking at social, cultural, ecological values. Why this is counterproductive in smallholder context is if I actually just focus on economic valuations on a small-scale farm, great, I might get more money, but that also exposes me to more risk if I just plant a cash crop, and then the markets change, and that cash crop is then losing all its value. I lose all my resilience, rather than having this kind of breadbasket of crops in my farm, which supports my food security, and also might culturally relate more to the food. Fairly obvious things, I think, but important things to think about. We're getting more into the findings now. So when we look at, as again I mentioned, this dual system, small scale and industrial, when we look at rural communication services for industrial agriculture, there's really strong communication processes. So I looked specifically at citrus and maize as systems in Mpumalanga. What they've got is through value chains themselves as this communication function, but also through different commodity groups that are private, but also provide this systemic intermediary role. They've got really strong multi-level communication platforms, and this aids decision making by mostly industrial farmers across the system. In practice, it is actually how this operates. So these commodity groups, I think this is a global phenomenon, but especially in South Africa, if you're an exporter, you're usually a very big business, and you get a levy charge on your exports, and then you go to these central coordination bodies. This automatically means you have a relationship with, for example, the Citrus Growers Association. Part of that is because I pay this levy, you have this normative expectation that I'll get this benefit in return. The CGA also have this money and power then, so they've got these relationships and the money to coordinate the system. And that's a real benefit. It provides networking, it provides backstopping, they can have private extension, they can have private research that really aids this export-orientated industry. So super good for industrial agriculture, less good for everyone else. When we're looking at agricultural education and training, again, you can actually use this systemic intermediary function by the big businesses to respond to industry needs, to create curriculum and pedagogies that respond to industrial agricultural needs. So super good for industrial agriculture. When we look at public small-scale developmental agriculture, I didn't really know what to call it. Actually, because the states reduced its role, there aren't public communication processes. This means curricula and pedagogies are developed in silo. We'll get into why that's an issue in a little bit. Because there's no strong extension, there's limited rural communication services through research and other organisations, there aren't interactions across different dimensions, cultural, social, economic, and this again reinforces that parallel economic development pathways for agriculture. There's also no system-wide framework that looks at whether experiential learning opportunities in food systems, and I'll get into why it's important a little bit, but that's a super important thing to think of moving forward when we look at agricultural education and training. What it reinforces when I look at this, the experiential learning and the lack of the identification, is there's a bias towards our kind of theoretical knowledge bases and our formal knowledge. I don't really know what formal knowledge actually is, but there's this thing of informal and formal knowledge, which I think is a bit reductive. What we see, because there's this siloed approach, this traditional approach to education and training, opportunities for students to gain experiential learning placements are missed. Why this is a real challenge for the system is that I think actually what we want is graduates to leave universities, let's say, as an example, with this really active problem-solving attitude to say there's this food systemic challenge that's not just on a farm, it's actually the entire system. But the lack of experiential learning means they've just got this theory, okay, this is how a farm works, this is the input you need, rather than being able to go into employment and say, there's this big problem with transboundary pestle diseases. Actually, how do I already have the network and experience to go into the system and say, oh, these are the people that we should be working with to solve this problem, rather than the kind of theoretical form knowledge just putting you in one box. I think you mentioned this a little bit earlier. So we've talked about education and training. If we're looking at research and innovation processes, this is a very poor and limited diagram that I think tries to explain, from my side, the strength of the industrial agricultural research and innovation process. So again, through this levy fee-paying process, they've got relationships up and down value chains. They also connect with top-down policy and strategy and agro-processing. All of these needs are gathered in a fairly well-coordinated body, the CGA and the CRI. They then actually provide a systemic intermediary role by publishing transdisciplinary, we need to think about what transdisciplinary actually means, I guess, but transdisciplinary funding pools that bring together different funding bodies. They can bring together different farmers. An issue I'm coming across at the moment, though, is in agriculture, when we say transdisciplinary, we mean, okay, let's work with farmers, or let's work with agro-processors. And it's still this monodimensional economic thinking, rather than saying, actually, where's the arts, where's other language-based elements we can bring in. So it's getting there, but it's not quite there. What this really does for, though, is research to work in a systemic manner in some ways. So it can tackle these not just at primary production, not just at universities, but within entire value chains, within input markets, within energy and water a little bit. So like pretty good. There are some issues though. So again, when we look at the neoliberal path dependencies, they don't really support systemic oriented research. Again, the this focus is just on citrus, for example. And so they don't look at actually the interplay between citrus farms and maize farms or anything like that, or actually water users or cultural rights to land, anything like that. So again, looked at this crop-specific and monodimensional economic, really, focused research. And kind of going back to the point earlier, this doesn't often support rural communication services and smallholder farmers, because it puts everyone in this box of, okay, the developmental pathways we're looking for is just economic and just about cash crops. There's also this, again, going back to the education and training point, the theory-based formal knowledge. I think a lot of the research that I see in Europe and Africa, the work I do is the EU and the AU, is looking at research as this academic thing. And a lot of it is not challenging positivistic and technologically deterministic paradigms. Why this is an issue, this is kind of my bugbear, I guess, is when I look at research that's happening with the universities and the associations I work with in South Africa, the research is expected to be led by universities, by different research groups, formal research groups, and a lot of it goes in a similar process that basically researchers collect data, which is very static. They then develop findings, and then only after that they do this community engagement and dissemination of findings, which is what I see in South Africa. I don't think that's very helpful for actually looking at how research can be a rural communication service that provides ongoing reflection on systems, provides systemic transformation. It's not just this one research project, but this ongoing process. Conclusions. So in South Africa, there's still this reliance on this vertical integration that comes, as something we looked at a little bit earlier, this neoliberal and neocolonial. I say neocolonial because there's an element of needing to get foreign income in South Africa because, or through exporting cash crops, so that's the neocolonial element. There's a real risk of the economic-centric developmental pathways, and this doesn't really take into consideration the whole of humanity and non-human elements in agriculture. When we look at the public side, whilst there's strong vertical integration, there's very poor and limited public horizontal integration that looks across systems, again, cultural, economic, but also different water, energy, food. And there's still really, really strong paradigms of adoption and diffusion, which I've not come up with a compelling argument against in my own head. I appreciate hearing from you all what you think about that. What does this mean for Mpumalanga's AET system? Actually, when we look at systemic and wicked problems that are multifaceted, they're not just economic, they're not just based around a particular commodity. Because we don't have this horizontal connection to this rural communication service that supports that, we're actually less able to deal with the entire nature of problems, and we just tackle them in little bit parts that mean all the solutions we develop aren't really that sustainable, they're just bit part, bit part, bit part. The way forward, I think, is to increase the role of rural communication services through research, through education, to bring everyone together around the table on an ongoing and continued basis to say, what are the common problems we will have? What are our mandates and skills and resources that we can bring together to the table that are differentiated but also can be complementary? How do we develop solutions on the back of this complementarity moving forward? This last bit is, again, how we look at food system transformation as the entirety is not through this monodimensional private lens, it's looking at the public system, the entire system we can think of. For AET, I think this requires us building curricula that actually responds to the entire real world needs, not just putting ourselves in little boxes. And a lot of this is not just relying on kind of traditional theory-based learning, but looking at actually how do we learn from each other and create relations and communication through this new AET system. This also then helps so we can feed back into a kind of communication and coordination systemic intermediary role, say, okay, how can we use education research to continually collectively develop our understanding of different problems, different solutions, ways forward. This requires a changing view of education and research, not just to be, let's develop findings and let's disseminate them, but actually research and education is ongoing rural communication services. And this service that requires participatory approaches to allow reflection on what the outcomes are, what the processes are that we can move towards more sustainable and sustaining futures. I think that's it.
Thank you very much, Tim. It was a really nice kind of look at an adaptation of the model, but also the theories around it. So we kind of came full circle here. Any quick explanatory questions to Tim?